In the decades following World War II, fragments of sealed intelligence, forgotten transmissions, and unmarked graves have surfaced like ghosts beneath the surface of official history. What was once labeled lost has begun to reappear through torn documents, coded messages, and testimonies long suppressed by both Allied and Axis powers. Within these fragments lie traces of a hidden war, one fought not only with tanks and bombs, but with silence, secrecy, and betrayal. These are the buried files of a conflict that never truly ended, the kind that history books refuse to print, and governments prefer to deny ever existed. Chapter 1: Operation Harbinger, the Vanished Arctic Convoy. In February 1944, the Barents Sea was a graveyard of steel and ice. Convoy PQ-99, operating under the codename Operation Harbinger, left the naval base at Scapa Flow with 12 merchant vessels, 2 destroyer escorts, and a Royal Navy corvette, the HMS Valiant Star. Their orders were routine on paper: deliver radar components, aviation fuel, and industrial machinery to Murmansk in support of the Soviet war effort. But the convoy's manifest contained entries redacted even in the Admiralty's own archives. 3 of the cargo holds were sealed under the authority of Section M of the Ministry of Supply, marked only with the cipher A7 Harbinger. By February 21st, after clearing the Norwegian coast, the convoy vanished. The Admiralty reported severe meteorological disruption and declared all 12 ships lost to a sudden Arctic storm. Yet no distress signals were ever received, and no wreckage was found. Only radio silence, abrupt and absolute. Soviet listening posts at Arkhangelsk recorded faint transmissions that night, a series of Morse pulses repeating the sequence K19, a frequency not assigned to any British vessel. In 1959, a Norwegian trawler operating north of Svalbard dredged up a corroded shipping manifest sealed in a brass tube. It bore the Admiralty seal and the name of Commander Alan Hargreaves, a logistics officer attached to the Royal Navy Research Division. Inside were partial cargo entries. Unit 4, Radiological Sample Containment. Handled per Admiralty Directive R1214. The term radiological was not used in military logistics until after 1945. Hargreaves had no recorded history beyond early 1944, and his personnel file ended abruptly with a typed note: transferred to classified assignment, further correspondence suspended, declassified. MI6 memoranda from the late 1970s reference Operation Harbinger as a containment transaction. Analysts suggested the convoy was carrying experimental materials captured from German laboratories in Norway, possibly linked to uranium extraction tests conducted under Heisenberg's nuclear program. The theory gained traction when fragments of German codebooks recovered from Trondheim included references to Project Nornir, chemical energy initiative meant to create a compact power source for high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft. If such material existed, it would have been invaluable to both Allied and Soviet atomic ambitions. But what troubled investigators decades later was evidence that the convoy may not have been destroyed by weather at all. Declassified Soviet submarine logs from the Red Banner Fleet mention an unidentified task force detected 300 nautical miles north of Tromsø, matching Harbinger's last known position. The Soviets noted unusually high electromagnetic readings in the area, describing the phenomenon as a storm without wind. Submarine S-312, under Captain Alexei Morozov, recorded the incident as object emitting continuous interference, suspected non-natural. Morozov's report was suppressed until 1983, when his personal notes surfaced after his death. He wrote, "It was as if the sea itself had turned to glass, reflecting a light that wasn't there." The Royal Navy never acknowledged the loss publicly beyond routine statements of maritime peril. Survivors' families received compensation letters signed not by Naval Command, but by the Ministry of Supply, an anomaly that later caught the attention of historian Dr. Lydia Crow, who, in 1996, accessed restricted files under the Freedom of Information Act. She discovered a memorandum dated March 12, 1944, addressed to SOE Liaison, North Sector, instructing that retrieval and confirmation of containment status were to be executed by civilian contractors attached to Ministry X. There was no record of any Ministry X. In 2003, a joint British-Norwegian underwater research team located sonar anomalies consistent with large metallic hulls. beneath 180 meters of ice near Franz Josef Land. The scan revealed at least 7 vessels arranged in a tight formation, unnatural for a convoy scattered by storm. The lead ship's bow appeared intact. Attempts to reach the site were delayed for political reasons until 2007, when an unmanned submersible confirmed British naval insignia and unbroken hull integrity. What it also found was stranger still, traces of cobalt-60 contamination in the surrounding ice, and faint energy readings emanating from the wrecks, still active after 60 years. Following that discovery, the British Ministry of Defence issued a blanket denial and restricted access to the coordinates, citing environmental hazards. Dr. Crow, who had been part of the research initiative, resigned from her academic post weeks later. In an interview before her death, she claimed the convoy was part of a secret exchange operation between Allied and German scientists, an attempt to secure nuclear data from the collapsing Reich before the Soviets could reach it. It wasn't about weapons, she said. It was about control of knowledge. Whoever possessed it could dictate the post-war order. Crow's files, obtained posthumously, contained photocopies of wartime communique, referencing Blue Division assets, and transfer, clearance under Harbinger protocol. The term Blue Division traditionally referred to Spanish volunteers under German command, but in these documents, it appeared as a coded designation for research personnel. One telegram marked Eyes Only, PM Liaison, instructed, ensure Soviet non-involvement. If contact occurs, implement Scylla procedure. There is no known record of any procedure by that name, though similar terminology appeared in Cold War nuclear contingency planning. In 2014, during the partial thawing of Arctic ice shelves, satellite imagery detected a metallic reflection at the coordinates corresponding to the Harbinger site. Within a month, the imagery was redacted from public satellite archives, citing national defense considerations. No further expeditions have been permitted. However, Russian geologists working under civilian permits near the area reported unusual interference with navigation instruments, consistent with electromagnetic activity. The unanswered question remains, what cargo required such secrecy that 12 ships could vanish without trace and remain unspoken for 70 years? If the convoy carried radioactive materials, it predated the known Allied atomic cooperation by nearly a year. If it was an exchange, it implies negotiations that violated every wartime alliance agreement. In 2018, a retired Royal Navy officer anonymously provided a fragment of a weather log labeled Harbinger Control, Final Transmission. The entry read, visibility nil, atmospheric readings unstable, standing order, proceed per Directive Alpha, no deviation. Repeat, no deviation. The message ended with a single word, contained. Whether that word referred to the mission's success or the fate of the ships themselves remains uncertain. What is clear is that Operation Harbinger was never meant to reach Murmansk. Its destination lay somewhere else, beneath the ice, beyond the reach of both history and accountability. The silence that followed was not from the storm, but from the deliberate burial of an operation that carried more than cargo. It carried the future of warfare itself. Chapter 2. The Prague Directive. Shadows of Unit 12. On the night of April 17, 1945, as German forces withdrew from Prague and Soviet artillery thundered from the east, a single freight train departed Dresden under the escort of the Reich's Technical Division. Its manifest listed only Directive materials, Prague. The transport, according to captured Wehrmacht dispatches, was designated for Secured Site 12, a facility whose existence was unknown even to the SS High Command. The train vanished somewhere between Ústí nad Labem and Prague's northern suburbs. When the Red Army entered the city 10 days later, all trace of the convoy and its cargo had disappeared. For decades, this incident was regarded as another casualty of the war's chaos, until a 1978 KGB internal report surfaced, revealing intercepted German radio traffic that night between Dresden Command and an unidentified station codenamed Eisenkrone. The messages referenced Phase D, activation of Unit 12, and directive compliance ensured. Soviet analysts concluded the exchange referred to a special technical unit operating under the Reich's Weapons Development Division. The report was buried under the category Soвершенно секретно, top secret, and would have remained there if not for a Czech historian, Milan Svoboda, who found the document's reference code misfiled in 1992 after the fall of the Eastern Bloc. Svoboda's research led him to the archives of the former Statní bezpečnost, STB, where he discovered fragments of testimonies from Czech resistance operatives describing a mysterious seizure in the final days of the war. They referred to themselves as Unit 12, a network of former engineers, partisans, and university researchers who had joined the resistance under the banner of the Technická obrana, technical defense. Their mission, according to a partially decoded letter, was to intercept the Dresden train and secure its cargo before either the Nazis or the Soviets could claim it. The operation was allegedly ordered by the exiled Czech government in London, with the support of British intelligence. What happened after the train's disappearance remains obscured by deliberate silence. Eyewitnesses in the small town of Roudnice nad Labem reported hearing explosions near the railway yard that night and seeing vehicles bearing both German and unfamiliar Allied markings. In 1947, a British liaison officer, Major Colin Hartley, stationed in post-war Czechoslovakia, filed a confidential report noting residual magnetic interference and burn patterns inconsistent with conventional explosives near the same railway line. Hartley's dispatch was classified under SOE recovery, Directive Prague, and never officially acknowledged. In 1968, during renovations beneath Prague Castle following the Soviet invasion, workers uncovered a sealed tunnel complex that extended several hundred meters beneath the Hradčany district. Inside, archaeologists found debris resembling military crates, splintered wood, metal hinges stamped with the eagle and swastika, and a single lead container bearing traces of polonium-210. The entire discovery was immediately taken over by Soviet military engineers, and the site was sealed again within hours. Official records list the find as architectural reinforcement materials. The Soviet file on the incident, later declassified in part, identified the location as Vault 12. Within the notes was a phrase repeated several times. Directive fulfilled. Transfer secured. But to where and by whom was never stated. The implication was clear enough. The Nazis had attempted to move advanced research materials to Prague as Germany collapsed, and someone, perhaps Unit 12, had intervened to take them elsewhere. Among Svoboda's most shocking discoveries was a correspondence between a British SOE officer, Lieutenant Arthur Leyland, and a Czech contact codenamed Eagle 2. In one decrypted message dated April 15, 1945, Leyland wrote, "Upon successful intercept, materials to be secured under Echo Light protocol. No Soviet contact permitted." The reference to Echo Light was unknown in any Allied operations manual. Later research indicated the term appeared again in a 1946 MI6 report describing non-conventional acoustic research extracted from Reich archives. Declassified US documents from Operation Paperclip mention an interrogation of Dr. Dieter Schumann, a physicist who worked at the AEG laboratories in Berlin. Schumann spoke of an experiment known as Resonanzwaffe, the resonance weapon, an attempt to create oscillations that could destabilize mechanical structures at long range using harmonic frequencies. He claimed the prototype was sent to Dresden in April 1945 for secure relocation. When shown photographs of the Hradčany tunnels, he reportedly remarked, "That is where they buried our failure." In 1998, Czech urban explorers entered a sealed portion of the Prague tunnel system after an earthquake exposed part of a hidden chamber near the old royal palace. Inside, they discovered rusted rails, collapsed wooden supports, and remnants of metallic equipment fused to the surrounding stone, as if subjected to intense heat. One of the explorers, Jan Pavlicek, recorded a brief video before his camera malfunctioned. In the footage, the floor appears littered with melted control panels, and at the edge of the frame, a sign in German reads, Sonderprojekt, Directive 12. Pavlicek died 2 months later from acute radiation sickness, despite never being exposed to known radioactive sources. His body was quietly removed from the Prague hospital by unidentified officials. When the footage reached international researchers, the Czech Ministry of Interior denied its authenticity, claiming it was a hoax. Yet, independent radiation surveys near the Hradčany castle perimeter in 2000 registered anomalies consistent with trace radioactive decay, localized to the area beneath the old tunnels. The readings were later dismissed as industrial residue. A surviving wartime memo written by SS Technical Division officer Dr. Karl Felsner surfaced in 2005 among documents auctioned from a private collection. It stated, Directive 12 is to be executed only upon Reich collapse. Containment must be absolute. Do not permit secondary activation. Resonance parameters remain unstable. The words secondary activation drew particular interest from researchers, suggesting that the device or material in question was not a single weapon, but part of a process capable of being reinitiated. The mystery of Unit 12's fate has never been resolved. The names of its members were erased from post-war resistance roles, their families never acknowledged. British records list Leyland as missing, presumed deceased, as of May 1945, though one post-war telegram from the Prague embassy, dated 1947, refers to Agent L arriving in Vienna with Directive fragments, Prague origin. The message was signed EC, possibly denoting Ewan Cameron, a name associated with early acoustic and psychological research in Canada during the early Cold War. In 2012, Czech security services quietly reopened an investigation after a construction project near Hradčany revealed another sealed passage, this one reinforced with wartime steel plating. Inside, survey teams reported discovering vitrified stone and collapsed containers still emitting trace energy signatures. The discovery was immediately classified under state secrecy. An internal memo from that period noted correlation with prior British intelligence designations, Echo Light and Directive 12. To this day, the exact nature of the Prague Directive remains uncertain. Whether the weapon or experiment ever functioned as intended is unknown. What is known is that every surviving reference to Directive 12 has been systematically removed from both Allied and Axis archives. In a final letter discovered among Svoboda's papers before his death in 2015, he wrote, "They wanted to silence resonance, but it was never silent. The tunnels hum in certain seasons. I have heard it myself, faint, but there. The city remembers. Those who have entered the sealed chambers beneath Prague speak of vibrations felt through the stone, a sound that seems to exist only when unrecorded. Unit 12 may have disappeared into history, but the echo of their mission remains buried beneath the capital, a warning from the dying hours of the war, still reverberating through time itself." Chapter 3. The Odessa Frequency, Signals from the Dead War. In July 1958, 13 years after the end of World War II, a US Navy signal analysis unit stationed aboard the USS Eldridge Bay in the Mediterranean intercepted a burst of Morse code emanating from a point deep within Argentina's interior. The cipher used was unmistakably German, the same encryption sequence utilized by the Kriegsmarine's B-Dienst intelligence network during the final years of the war. The call sign was U-451. That submarine had been declared sunk off the coast of Algeria in 1944. The message repeated every 72 hours with mathematical precision, ending each time with a single word: Heimat. The transmissions, first dismissed as interference or mimicry, drew the attention of the US Navy's SIGINT Division and MI6's Section 9, the post-war counterintelligence branch responsible for tracking Nazi fugitives. They dubbed the phenomenon the Odessa Frequency, referencing the rumored Odessa organization, the secret network that supposedly helped former SS and Nazi officers escape Europe through clandestine routes in Spain and South America. But what set these signals apart wasn't their content, it was the technology. The carrier frequency employed sideband modulation techniques unknown to wartime radio systems, and the signal strength was powerful enough to reach the North Atlantic with no discernible relay. In August, MI6 field agent Peter Halloran arrived in Buenos Aires under diplomatic cover. His reports to London describe his movements through the post-war German enclaves of Bariloche and Villa General Belgrano, settlements that had become centers for expatriates from the former Reich. Halloran noted that locals refused to discuss wartime arrivals and that church records from the 1940s and 1950s had been replaced with identical, typewritten duplicates. He traced the triangulated origin of the Odessa signals to a remote area near San Carlos de Bariloche, where the ruins of a half-completed hydroelectric project still stood from the Perón years. Local authorities denied entry to foreigners, citing safety concerns. Halloran entered regardless. His final telegram to London, dated October 11, 1958, read simply, "Transmission verified. Source not human. Request extraction." He was never heard from again. In 1962, a joint Anglo-American reconnaissance team, codenamed Operation Sentinel, was dispatched to investigate. Declassified fragments of their after-action report describe an approach through dense forest, the discovery of a reinforced concrete structure built into the mountainside, and evidence of continuous electrical activity despite no visible power source. Inside, the team found equipment bearing both German and American markings: oscillators, vacuum tubes, and signal modulators, labeled with the insignia of the AEG Corporation, and early RCA prototypes. The facility contained a single chamber dominated by a large cylindrical device, roughly 3 meters in height, connected to a wall of analog tape recorders looping continuously. The tapes carried German voices, official dispatches, naval commands, and even intercepted Allied transmissions, yet the dates spoken within them postdated the war by over a decade. The lead investigator, Captain Jonathan Rees, noted in his field log, "The voices do not repeat in the same sequence. Each playback is different, as if the tapes were rewriting themselves." The following day, all radio equipment aboard their support aircraft began emitting the same low-frequency tone as the Odessa signal. The mission was terminated. 2 weeks later, the reconnaissance team's aircraft disappeared en route to Ascension Island. The only recovered fragment was the flight recorder, retrieved from the ocean by a Portuguese fishing trawler. The final entry captured a faint male voice repeating the same German phrase, "Der Krieg ist nicht vorbei." The war is not over. The CIA classified all information under Project Chariot, a Cold War-era containment initiative created to investigate non-conventional communications originating from hostile or unidentified technological bases. Internal memos from 1964 reveal that a US intelligence liaison met with West German BND representatives who denied any knowledge of continuing Nazi transmissions, but acknowledged legacy research into long-range signal propagation using atmospheric reflection, research originally begun by Dr. Wilhelm Fessenden at Peenemünde in 1944. The program's codename in German records was Project Nachklang, literally Project Echo. In 1973, Argentine security forces raided a suspected Nazi compound near the same region, acting on intelligence from Mossad's Operation Damocles. The raid uncovered underground tunnels filled with crates, marked with faded German insignia and the stylized letters OD. Among the finds was a rusted transmitter, identical to those described in the Sentinel report. It was still operational, powered by a geothermal conduit running from the nearby volcanic ridge. The Argentine report noted the discovery of audio recordings of unknown origin, which were immediately seized by US diplomatic personnel and never seen again. Witnesses present at the site later reported a low, rhythmic hum that persisted for hours after the power was cut, a pulse that seemed to emanate from the concrete itself. A local worker claimed the sound formed words in German when played through recording equipment, though his statement was later withdrawn. He disappeared within weeks. In the early 1980s, declassified portions of the NSA's SIGINT archives revealed references to recurring transmission patterns consistent with Axis-era cipher protocols emanating from Sector 42A, Southern Hemisphere. Despite technological advances, no triangulation attempt was ever successful. The signals appeared to migrate, shifting locations by several kilometers each year, as if moving with intention. Argentine military intelligence took renewed interest following the Falklands War. During the conflict, British naval operators again reported interference from anomalous long-wave transmissions off the Patagonian coast. The frequencies matched the Odessa signature. Official British reports labelled the interference as ionospheric distortion. Yet internal naval memos, later leaked, describe audible German speech within the static references to rebuilding command and the second phase. In 1990, an American journalist, Daniel Pierce, published a short article in the Atlantic Review titled "The Ghost Transmissions," detailing his access to a retired NSA analyst who claimed to have listened to the Odessa broadcast during the 1960s. The analyst, identified only as R, stated that one of the transmissions contained coordinates corresponding to the location of the original Peenemünde testing range in Germany. When researchers checked the area in 1992, they discovered remnants of buried signal equipment matching the design of the Argentine site, satellite, Surveys conducted in 2003 by the European Space Agency recorded brief electromagnetic spikes in the same frequency range during a geomagnetic storm, one pulse originating from Argentina, another from the North Sea. The pattern resembled the original B-Dienst code header. No nation has publicly acknowledged the phenomenon. Officially, the transmissions are unverifiable atmospheric noise. Unofficially, documents recovered through whistleblower leaks indicate that the NSA's Project Chariot was never discontinued. The files mention attempts to replicate the Odessa signal in controlled laboratory conditions. Every attempt failed. The tone carried an irregular phase pattern, a signature consistent with biological interference. One analysis concluded, the waveform contains non-random modulation consistent with an embedded source that may not be mechanical. In 2015, a group of Argentine amateur radio operators claimed to have captured a weak transmission identical to the 1958 signal. The decoded message, after removing interference, consisted of 4 words. Continue directive. Await Heimat. The coordinates transmitted corresponded to a region now under military restriction. When questioned, Argentine defense officials denied all knowledge of any restricted zone matching those coordinates. If the Odessa frequency was truly the product of surviving Nazi technology, it raises questions that history prefers unanswered. If not, then what intelligence, or intelligence agency, has the capability to emulate 1940s cryptography with such precision and persistence? In a classified memorandum dated 1975, released briefly under the US Freedom of Information Act before being reclassified, a single line summarizes the investigation. Source not confirmed. Transmission persists despite isolation. Recommend continued observation. The network is still active. The last recorded intercept, logged by a civilian enthusiast in 2018, came at precisely 0300 hours GMT. The signal lasted 12 minutes and ended, as it always had, with a single word. Heimat. Chapter 4. Project. Morgenrot. The Berlin Archive Collapse. In February 1963, Berlin was still divided by more than a wall. It was divided by memory. The Western powers busied themselves with reconstruction, while the East German authorities guarded their archives with obsessive secrecy. Beneath a crumbling administrative building in East Berlin's Lichtenberg district, construction workers uncovered an unregistered sub-basement sealed since the final days of the war. The vault bore the insignia of the SS Technisches Amt, the technical office of the Reich, and a hand-stenciled name scrawled in fading red. Project Morgenrot. Within hours of discovery, Stasi officers arrived and sealed off the site under Directive 2243, designating it a matter of national scientific interest. The workers were relocated, their pay doubled, and their statements erased from public record. A Stasi report, declassified in fragments after German reunification, described what they found. Inside the vault were 43 metal crates lined in lead, each containing meticulously wrapped documents, schematic blueprints, and fragments of scientific apparatus. Some were marked Kraftfeldversuch 5, Force Field Experiment 5. Others referenced Zeitfeldtechnik. Temporal field technology. While most historians dismiss the latter term as technical exaggeration, the document's authenticity was verified by the German Federal Archives decades later. The surviving labels listed Peenemünde, Dresden, and Oranienburg as points of origin, suggesting a direct connection between Morgenrot and the Reich's late-stage weapons programs. The Stasi's primary investigator, Colonel Ernst Vogel, described in his initial report that several crates were not of German manufacture. One bore the serial code of a British Army research crate from 1943. Another contained US Army oxygen cylinders stamped with property of AAF. How such items had found their way into an SS facility inside Berlin during wartime baffled even Soviet overseers. Vogel was ordered to forward the materials to a facility outside Jüterbog, designated Institut 12 Weint, where Soviet engineers had been consolidating captured technology for study. His report ended abruptly with the phrase, "transfer complete, containment uncertain." In 1970, during an internal audit of East German research expenditures, Morgenrot resurfaced. An engineer who had worked under Vogel claimed that among the recovered items was a series of film reels depicting experiments conducted in underground chambers. The reels, labeled only with sequential codes, showed technicians adjusting high-voltage equipment around a suspended metallic sphere roughly 2 meters wide. The room's instruments bore both German and English markings. The footage ended with a blackout and a recorded phrase shouted in German, "Abbruch! Feld ist aktiv!" Abort! The field is active! The engineer, later identified as Friedrich Lenz, disappeared after attempting to contact Western journalists. His apartment was sealed, his files confiscated. The official cause of death: industrial accident. When East Germany collapsed in 1989, fragments of Vogel's Morgenrot file were recovered from the shredded Stasi archives. The documents confirmed that portions of the material had been secretly exchanged with Soviet research officials in 1964 as part of an operation codenamed Zarya 91. Zarya 9's stated goal was to investigate energy field anomalies derived from captured enemy documentation. Among the attached translations was a report prepared by Soviet physicist Dr. Ivan Goriev, who concluded that the Morgenrot materials described a theoretical process for spatial acceleration through magnetic resonance oscillation, terminology later echoed in classified US patents related to radar stealth technology. What puzzled Goriev and his team most was that the schematics contained annotations in English, using American technical notation from the 1940s. Some pages even carried the watermark of the Manhattan Engineer District. To the Soviets, this implied either espionage or direct collaboration between Allied and Axis scientists during the final phase of the war. A theory dismissed publicly but privately pursued within the KGB's scientific division. A 1992 German investigation led by historian Anja Keller revealed further anomalies. She traced archival numbers from the Morgenrot crates to requisition orders from the SS Research Bureau, cross-referenced with intercepted Allied communications, decrypted by Bletchley Park in April 1945. One such message from a British field officer in Hamburg mentioned Operation Meridian, recovery of experimental prototypes to be shared per mutual understanding. Keller believed that the mutual understanding referenced in the memo pointed to a covert intelligence exchange between British and German engineers seeking to preserve scientific work before the war's end, regardless of allegiance. In 2005, the German Federal Archive opened a restricted section containing recovered documents, Technical Office East. Among them were photographs of several of the Morgenrot crates as they appeared in 1963, heavily corroded but intact. One photo shows a folder labeled Morgenrot B2, Versuch 1143 Peenemünde. Inside were printed diagrams of a circular metallic structure surrounded by concentric coils, annotated with terms like Feld generator and Stabilisatorfeld. Analysts noted its resemblance to early particle accelerator schematics, though no such device was known to have existed under the Third Reich's resource constraints. Keller's research suggested that Morgenrot may have been a hybrid project, combining radar, electromagnetism, and atomic study, part of the same research network that spawned Project Reese in Silesia. Witnesses from the Peenemünde complex interviewed after the war mentioned an experiment conducted under Dr. Hans Kammler's oversight in late 1944 to produce stable magnetic containment for experimental plasma. One technician, interrogated by Soviet intelligence, described a brief moment during testing when the object vanished and reappeared, half buried in the wall. His testimony was dismissed as delusion, yet the Morgenrot schematics align uncannily with his description. After reunification, both NATO and Russian delegations quietly competed to locate the original site of Morgenrot. In 2011, ground-penetrating radar surveys beneath Lichtenberg detected a collapsed sub-basement beneath the documented vault, suggesting there was more below the first discovery. Environmental specialists reported elevated electromagnetic fields and abnormally magnetized soil samples. Shortly after, the Berlin city government declared the site hazardous to excavate and filled the shaft with concrete. Curiously, digital versions of the Stasi's Morgenrot files uploaded to the Federal Archive's online database were corrupted. Researchers found that the affected files, when opened, emitted a faint static noise, a repeating pulse at 3.7 kHz audio. Engineers analyzing the signal discovered that the pulses corresponded to the Morse sequence ALLENS, possibly referencing Allensbach, a post-war intelligence center in West Germany. Yet no one has been able to verify whether the signal originated from data corruption or intentional encoding. A classified NATO memorandum dated 1997, later leaked through investigative journalists, summarized Morgenrot as follows. Recovered documentation suggests coordinated pre-surrender technology transfer between Reich engineers and Western intelligence elements, conducted to prevent Soviet acquisition. Resulting material led indirectly to advancements in post-war radar and propulsion. Further research discontinued due to residual hazards. The phrase residual hazards was never explained. Those who have seen the surviving documents describe them as unnerving, technical, yet unmoored from conventional physics. One British researcher, granted limited access under supervision in 2016, claimed the handwriting in the margins changed style mid-page, as if multiple authors, or perhaps the same author under duress, had contributed notes over time. The last line on the final page read, in English, "Begin transmission only when both hemispheres align." No credible explanation has ever been offered for that phrase. Some suggest it referred to hemispherical coils depicted in the designs, others to global hemispheres, implying synchronization across continents. Whatever the meaning, Morgenrot remains a ghost project buried under Berlin's foundations, its technical ambitions entombed alongside the paranoia that birthed it. Officially, all surviving artifacts from the Morgenrot vault were either destroyed or transferred to safe storage under the Bundeswehr's Defense Research Archives. Unofficially, a former East German archivist claimed in a 2019 interview that 3 crates labeled Morgenrot were quietly shipped to the United States in 1990 under diplomatic cover, accompanied by 2 men speaking Russian-accented English. Their destination was listed simply as Wright Field. In the decades since, the term Morgenrot has vanished from academic discourse, but not from classified registries. Each attempt to request the files, whether in Berlin, Moscow, or Washington, returns the same response. Records exist, access denied due to active review. As though the project, in some silent way, is still ongoing. And somewhere beneath the city, concrete holds the memory of that impossible vault, humming faintly in the dark, waiting for dawn. Chapter 5. The Kestrel Papers, Forgotten Wings of Division. In January 1946, a reconnaissance patrol from the French Alpine Corps recovered the wreckage of a downed Luftwaffe courier aircraft high in the Mont Cenis Pass. The plane, a Dornier d'Eau 24, had crashed into the glacier at such an angle that much of its fuselage remained preserved beneath the ice. Inside, investigators found a sealed leather satchel containing 32 technical documents marked Reichsluftfahrtministerium, Sonderstufe Kestrel. The papers were immediately transferred to the Allied Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, for evaluation. Within weeks, they vanished into US custody under Operation Lusty, the program tasked with collecting advanced German aeronautical research before the Soviets could claim it. According to an internal CIOS index dated February 3, 1946, Project Kestrel was a sub-unit of the Luftfahrtforschungsanstalt Braunschweig, Aeronautical Research Institute Braunschweig, established in late 1944 under Dr. Erich Hollmann, a physicist best known for his work on magnetron radar. The Kestrel files described a jet-powered glider with no propeller assembly, no fuel lines, and a fuselage coated with what was referred to as reactive ceramic composite. The design featured a sealed cockpit and an internal energy circuit described only as field drive. Selbstverstärkt. Analysts noted the absence of a standard propulsion system. Instead, handwritten annotations suggested pressureless lift generation through magnetic displacement. The surviving blueprints were bizarrely annotated in both German and English. Several pages bore American-style engineering initials and inch-based measurements, a detail that disturbed post-war analysts. Among the signatures was one R.C. Dwyer, or Section 7, WPL, later identified as Robert C. Dwyer, a propulsion engineer from Wright-Patterson Laboratory, who in 1945 had been part of the US technical team sent to inspect the Peenemünde test sites. How his name appeared on wartime German papers remains unexplained. Declassified correspondence between the Reichsluftfahrtministerium and the SS Technical Office references the project as Adlerstellung Kestrel, described cryptically as joint theoretical study with transatlantic partner. This phrase raised eyebrows in British intelligence circles. When the report surfaced in 1952, MI6 concluded the term transatlantic partner might refer to German-American industrial links active before the US entered the war, such as the Luftwaffe's covert connections with General Electric and Pratt & Whitney through neutral intermediaries in Switzerland. But the technical material itself implied collaboration long after 1941, an impossibility that officials quietly chose not to pursue. In 1953, a classified Air Materiel Command report titled Evaluation of Foreign Aircraft Concepts made direct reference to Kestrel field propulsion prototypes recovered from Braunschweig facility. The evaluation noted non-standard alloys resistant to electromagnetic, fatigue, and energy fluctuations unaccounted for by mechanical systems. The report's final recommendation was terse. Suspend experimentation. Anomalous readings suggest instability beyond containment threshold. 2 months later, the entire section of the report concerning Kestrel was reclassified under the newly formed Blue Book Division, though that program's official purpose dealt with aerial phenomena, not propulsion technology. During the following decade, whispers of Kestrel resurfaced in unexpected places. Test pilots at Wright Field reported witnessing silent, disc-shaped craft performing controlled maneuvers during nighttime test operations. Engineers attributed the sightings to atmospheric reflections or classified drone tests. However, a debriefing transcript dated April 1959 records a statement from test pilot Major Alan Porter, who claimed to have seen an aircraft bearing the partially visible markings V-7K hovering momentarily above the tarmac before vanishing into low cloud cover. Porter's report was sealed under experimental optical phenomena and never acknowledged publicly. By the early 1960s, investigative journalist Gordon Winslow began pursuing rumors of captured Luftwaffe prototypes in US possession. His 1965 book, The Quiet Skies, cited unnamed Air Force sources who described a gravity-nullifying glider project conducted at a Nevada range, inspired by wartime German research. Winslow's claims were dismissed as sensationalism until, 2 years later, a Freedom of Information request revealed the existence of a 1946 Army Air Forces document labeled Evaluation Kestrel Series, Type V7. Though heavily redacted, it confirmed the aircraft had been partially assembled at an American facility for testing of non-reactive field propulsion under controlled magnetic conditions. In 1972, a retired Luftwaffe technician named Otto Bergmann gave an interview to a German television program claiming to have worked under Dr. Hollmann at Braunschweig. He described a wingless craft with ceramic skin, tested in early 1945, and said its internal systems made the air shimmer, like heat around it. The broadcast was pulled from re-airing after US embassy officials lodged a complaint with the network, citing unverified and potentially classified wartime content. Bergmann died less than a year later. His notes were confiscated by authorities claiming to represent the German Federal Intelligence Service, BND. In the early 1980s, during restoration work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, construction crews uncovered a sealed sub-basement beneath Building 22, containing decommissioned equipment labeled Project K. A memorandum from the Air Materiel Command archives describes the discovery of corroded metallic structures, possible test hole sections, unidentified power assemblies. Within days, the chamber was resealed by order of the Department of Defense. A brief public statement attributed the closure to asbestos concerns. Unclassified portions of NASA's 1990 Advanced Propulsion Concepts study list a section titled Field Displacement Theories, Historical Notes. Among the references was an entry reading, Origin Uncertain, related to wartime research program Kestrel, see AMC Technical Index 49322. Attempts to locate document 49322 have failed. Its file number corresponds to a missing segment of the archive. By 2001, the legend of the Kestrel papers had merged into broader conspiracy narratives surrounding post-war technology transfer. Yet fragments of authentic documentation continued to surface in private collections. One such fragment, authenticated by forensic examination, contained a hand-drawn equation involving magnetic phase displacement and the notation G of force URH. The handwriting matched that of Hollmann. The equation itself remains unsolved but suggests an attempt to manipulate gravitational potential using electromagnetic vectors, decades ahead of accepted theory. In 2009, declassified portions of the US Department of Energy's Project Condor files mentioned legacy Kestrel samples undergoing containment monitoring. The context remains opaque, but an attached lab note from 1968 stated, "Specimen retains magnetic response under vacuum. Emits low-frequency oscillation when cooled below 20 K. Recommend storage under isolation. No additional entries follow." Researchers attempting to cross-reference Kestrel data with Operation Paperclip manifests found another anomaly. Dr. Holman's name appears twice in post-war US personnel rosters, once marked deceased 1945, and again as consultant, Germany, 1949. His death certificate, issued in Berlin, lists no remains recovered. A 1950 photograph from an American research symposium in Dayton shows a man of similar appearance standing beside Dr. Theodor von Karman. The man's name tag reads, E. Holman. In 2017, a group of historians gained limited access to declassified CIOS microfilms. Frame 77 of reel number 493 contains an image of a schematic identical to those described in the Kestrel papers, a teardrop-shaped hull labelled Versuchsmodell K1. Beneath it, a note in English reads, "Potential at 0.82 C achieved during closed-cycle test, unverified." The initials beneath are RCD. Whether Kestrel represented genuine progress in propulsion or a wartime delusion born of desperation, its shadow lingers in both Allied and Axis archives. Each nation claims fragments of its existence but denies the whole. What makes the matter darker still is the unbroken pattern of redaction. Every time the Kestrel designation appears, documents vanish, files are sealed, and witnesses die unexpectedly. Today, in restricted vaults of the US Air Force's Foreign Technology Division, a collection marked KF Archives 1946 current remains classified. The last update to the record occurred in 1989, logged by a scientist whose security clearance has since been expunged. The entry reads only, "Recovered engine sample continues minimal emission. No decay observed. Possible self-sustaining field." Whatever the Kestrel engineers built in the dying months of the Reich, it was never meant for flight in the ordinary sense. It was meant to alter the very medium through which flight occurs. And as the final line of the surviving paper fragment reads, written in Holman's unmistakable hand, "To rise without thrust is to divide the sky itself." The discovery of the forgotten archives raises more questions than answers. Each file, each blurred photograph, each stamped and reclassified memorandum points to a war that may never have truly ended, one waged in laboratories, in sealed vaults, and through signals still echoing from beneath oceans and ice. What was buried under Peenemünde? Who continued the transmissions from the South Atlantic? And how far did the Kestrel experiments reach before history folded over them? Somewhere, in unmarked storage beneath the hum of cold servers, fragments of that erased future still breathe, waiting for someone to listen closely enough to hear the war's last frequency.